Hello, everyone. I'm happy to welcome you all to today's webinar on Generative AI, OER, and OEP. This is the sixth of the series of webinars we are organizing at the Center for Educational Technology and Media in collaboration with the Faculty of Education of the Open University of Sri Lanka on Generative AI in higher education and teacher education. So today we have another expert with us to share her experiences, share her thoughts and experiences with us. So let me take this opportunity to introduce our speaker today. Associate Professor Glenda Cox. Associate Professor Glenda Cox works in the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching at the University of Cape Town. And her portfolio includes postgraduate teaching, curriculum change projects, open education, and staff development. She holds the UNESCO Chair in Open Education and Social Justice 2021 to 2025. And she's a member of the UN Twin Network on Open Education 2024 to 2028. She's also a board member of the Open Education Global Organization. She's on the editorial board of the International Journal of Students as Partners, joined in 2022. She is passionate about the role of open education in the changing world of higher education. Associate Professor Cox is currently the principal investigator in the Digital Open Textbooks for Development .4D initiative. Her current research includes analyzing the role of open textbooks for social justice. So let me welcome Glenda to our webinar today. And I'm very happy because I also have collaborated with Glenda in some OER projects. So let me hand over to you. So before that, the audience, as you know, we are recording this session. And if you have any questions based on the presentation, please post them on the chat box and Glenda can take them at the end of her presentation. Okay, then thank you very much everyone for joining and over to you, Glenda.
Thank you very much, Veronica. I'm just going to share. Good, wonderful. I hope that's all visible and clear.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very interesting sounding seminar series. As Veronica said, I am from the University of Cape Town, from the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, and quite involved with UNESCO work as a chair in open education and social justice, and involved in various other open work I'll talk about in a moment. And at the University of Cape Town and the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, one of our roles is to be informing the university around policy and frameworks around generative artificial intelligence, as well as developing webinars and short courses, and to really try and advise staff and students around this particular challenge that we have now. So it's become embedded in our lives. And so through this experience of working at the university, I've started to think about generative artificial intelligence and open education, which is a topic that all of us who are passionate about open education are busy exploring at the moment. Great. So this is a picture of the University of Cape Town. So we have multiple campuses around Cape Town. We have around about 29,000 students, about 5,000 staff, around about 1,200 academic staff. We are mostly residential, although we are increasingly building online courses. Kind of medium size, I suppose, campus-based, research intensive, and we're the top ranked university in Africa, in fact, South Africa and Africa. I've been involved with open education since 2010 when it became part of my portfolio. And I've had the privilege of being involved in various networks through the years. Growing open education at the University of Cape Town certainly was one of my main aspects of my job to start off with. And a lot of that is now run by the library. I have been a member of the Global OER Graduate Network, where I did my PhD. Highly recommended network if somebody is wanting to do a PhD in open education. As Sharonika said, I've been involved in Open Education Global and organizing conferences. The picture at the bottom, research on open education resources for development, RAW4D, was a big project, and that's where Sharonika and I had the pleasure of working together. Sharonika is in that picture. She's got an orange top on. And then increasingly recently being involved in UNESCO work around open education. And this map of Africa with openness across it is kind of was always the ambition and the dream about all of these projects right from the very beginning, was to make sure that Global South knowledge could be shared with the rest of the world. That is the ongoing dream. So I think we all know what open education is, but I thought I would still just go back here just for a little bit of clarity, and perhaps to some of you who are new to open education resources, and also open textbooks. So the principles with open education is kind of a broader umbrella term, I like to call it, that includes resources, tools, and practices. So kind of an overarching movement. And the principle behind that is that these resources, tools, and practices are free of legal and financial and technical barriers, right? So they can be reused, translated, adapted, and shared. Open education resources fits under that umbrella, and they are learning, teaching, and research materials in any format and medium. And again, released under an open license that permits no-cost access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, and redistribution. And then open textbooks, and I'm talking about open textbooks specifically because I want to share a case study a little bit later on, and because a lot of the research and work that I'm doing at the moment is around open textbooks. But just to kind of clarify where they fit in, they're a kind of OER. And they have these wonderful affordances. And the research that I've been doing in my unit, in my project, Digital Open Textbooks for Development, has been looking at open textbooks and their affordances for collaboration, not only with other colleagues, but also with students. And then the role of UNESCO. UNESCO had put out the recommendations on open education resources in 2019. And that has been a wonderful framework to guide government, universities, individuals on how to be thinking about implementing open education resources. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other more recent UNESCO developments as I go through the slides. Why does it matter? Well, we know there's a global need for quality, accessible resources. Open education has the amazing affordance to be localized and translated. We can be thinking about multilingual approaches. We can be thinking about relevance to our students and epistemic representation. Materials can be reused, so we waste less time. We can think about approaches that reconsider the levels of inclusivity in teaching and learning approaches. And it has this amazing ability through open education, as so much is about the process of creating materials where students, colleagues, members of communities can come together to co-create materials. So it's not only about the resources that are created, but the power is really on how we work together to create those materials. And of course, the goal is for 2030 to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. I like this quote from a very interesting resource, 2021 New Social Contract, that was written by a number of different authors who are involved with UNESCO work. And in that resource, they talk about openness and inclusivity and the importance of making this knowledge freely available. The work that we've been doing at the University of Cape Town over the years, and also the work through the Digital Open Textbooks for Development project, has all been underpinned by a social justice framework. And I won't go into detail about that today, but that is something that I do talk about at length often in presentations. But today it's a philosophical reminder that open education and social justice are aligned, and there is a lot of research that shows the strong role of open education to address injustice. And I like this quote by Cheryl Hodgkinson Williams and Henry Trotter from 2018, where they say, at the heart of the open education resource movement is the intention to provide affordable access to culturally relevant education to all in a manner consistent with social justice. So principles for us to underpin our open movement. I wanted to go back to some basics. Again, I'm not quite sure just how aware you all are of open licenses and copyright. It's becoming increasingly important for us to be aware of it. It's not something that we can ignore, and I'm going to just kind of build on this and then move into discussion around artificial intelligence. So our definition of copyright, and I'm sure that you're all kind of quite aware of it, a collection of exclusive rights given to creators and authors to protect their original works. And that all rights reserved means that whatever the work is, it may not be, you may not reproduce it. If you want to use it, you should ask permission, and sometimes there will be royalty payments. You may not use it on the internet at all if it's under full copyright. And what we have had, which is that second point there, fair use or fair dealing, depending on where you're located, for classroom use. So many of us have been using copywritten material in our classroom slides and other materials. And we've been doing that for a while because it's a space that's protected. Increasingly, we're using learning management systems, and it's so easy to have material that's out there that can be copied, pasted by students, perhaps a really nice image, and it's not clear who actually has the copyright. And especially important to remember always, whatever material you have, if you're putting it out onto the internet, it's automatically under full copyright. So we need to be thinking about this. So this is kind of the copyright, these are the principles of copyright, but it becomes and has become increasingly fuzzy over many years now. And that's because of the internet. The first image that you saw, the books and the copyright, made 100% sense in kind of those times where materials were not easily available online. It was easier to police copyright and to ensure that authors could keep their copyright without somebody taking it. Now it's a little fuzzy. It has just become more and more complicated. And I'm saying it's a little fuzzy for 20, 30 years now, maybe more. And so one of the solutions for this kind of fuzzy copyright is alternative copyright licensing. and I might well be talking to you and you know all about Creative Commons licensing and the open software licensing, such as the GNU, General Public License. You might know all about these. But this is why these licenses came into being early 2000s, and maybe even before that with open source software. It seemed necessary that there should be a way of sharing. There should be a way that copyright is not binary, where it's either full or it's completely public domain. And that's where these licenses fitted in so that authors could still protect their intellectual property, receive attribution at the end of the day, but then also specify how others should use their materials. And so this kind of some rights reserved copyright licensing came into place. And most of us, I imagine, would be using Creative Commons, and this is just a snapshot. I think that the 2 billion works and counting is more at about 2.5 billion works, and increasing. It's a wonderful website to go and visit, Creative Commons. It has all kinds of resources that are all openly licensed. So Creative Commons is growing, and well worth exploring this incredible resource. And so in summary, these are the open licenses, Creative Commons licenses, which I won't be going into in any detail. You would have seen on my first slide that my slides are CC by share alike. And that was also because some of the images I've used, the authors of the creators of those images have specified that particular license. So this is what they look like, allowing sharing to happen. And the principle behind all of this work is, and the open movement in general, and open science, and all these overlapping opens, is if we want to solve the world's biggest problems, then we need to make the knowledge about them open. That is how we're going to do good science, if we can collaborate and share. So, and enter generative artificial intelligence. Just to muddy the waters even further, just to make our lives more complicated, but we will also talk about exciting opportunities. But it does certainly make our lives, based on the principles of these kinds of copyright systems through Creative Commons that were built on community and trust, generative artificial intelligence has thrown a spanner in the works. It's very exciting reading about all of the latest developments in generative AI, and very difficult to keep up. Things are changing rapidly. Every time we have a look, there are new tools, new advancements in tools, people writing extensively around working with AI, many authors focused solely on AI, whereas for a lot of us, this is now one component, an additional component we now need to try and understand for the sake of our students and our own sakes. And it's quite difficult to try and keep up. And I'll suggest a couple of different ideas of what you could maybe be thinking of. But this work, this is somebody I follow, Stefan Bouchard, who has a Substack, and I regularly get posts and emails from this particular author, and he probably posts 2 or 3 times a week with incredible detail about what's happening in generative AI space, and really exciting, interesting work, and well worth reading. And so he talks about the rise of LLMs in this particular post, which is probably be a good thing to read. And he talks about more LLMs, but more recently MLLMs. So originally large language models, when they were primarily processed text, but these systems, these new systems, are now more accurately described as multimodal language systems and agents. and agents of the new are about to appear in a big way on our radar. So unlike earlier AI that only handled text, these models process words, images, video in a unified architecture that treats all information as part of the same underlying language. So they are going into generating output and they can take action. So they can, and it's through something called function calling, where they decide which external tools will be helpful, request information, and weave the results into responses. So wonderful, interesting developments that are happening. And behind all of this is big tech. And as this particular review, MIT Technology Review says, AI is owned by big tech. And if we're not careful, Microsoft with Copilot and Anthropic with Claude and Amazon with Google and Gemini and Meta with formerly Facebook and OpenAI with ChatGPT have a staggering combined market value of more than $7 trillion. Massive resources being plowed into developing AI at the moment. And this is also a concern, right? Because we know that this kind of leading big tech also threatens the divide. And if we have a look at, there's a lot of information out there around how we should be concerned about this if we're from the global south and thinking about the digital divide. And here we see just one example of this kind of developing countries versus developed and looking at national artificial intelligence strategies. And so there's a concern that it's threatening the widening divide, the financial costs of these tools, their dependence on extensive computing infrastructure, and their development primarily for affluent models, all risk leaving behind precisely the communities that could benefit most from its incorporation in educational technology. So we need to be thinking about AI systems that embody openness as digital public goods, transparency in their structures and functioning, and collaborative governance structures. So big tech, AI, sophisticated AI tools all cost incredible amount of money to develop and puts increasing pressure on ourselves and our students. What we will have available will be the free versions, which are becoming more sophisticated for sure, but we can't access the more expensive versions. We can't expect our students to access the more expensive versions of these generative AI tools. And so we can see that access will become a problem. And then these models are all trained in the global north, and we see a lot of bias. And I'm sure that we've all done little experiments around creating an image or creating some form of information, and it doesn't represent our realities at all. We have to really embed cultural tips and tricks to be able to have ourselves seen in this material. And this, I'm talking specifically from a global South perspective. And there are these different kinds of bias. So this is kind of stereotypical and exclusionary language in representational bias. But there's also allocation bias, which is where there are disparities in how benefits or harms are distributed across demographic groups. We need to keep all of this in mind as part of our critical AI literacy. There's a lack of openness in AI. There's a lack of reproducibility. We don't know how they were trained. We don't have access to that. We don't know what the methodology was around how they were designed, what their models were. We are worried about ethics, and we're worried about the bias that I just outlined now. We're worried about barriers to entry and inequity around funding to get these materials. And then there's also this big tech vendor lock-in where institutions become reliant on certain platforms, and that kind of stifles any kind of independence or innovation. So quite a few things to worry about. And these were some points brought up very recently, last week in fact, by Patrick Masson. There's a link there to some of those points and conversations. And then what types of data are used to train large language models? And we know it's all kinds of data, right? It's web crawled. It could include copyright materials. It could include materials from public domain, books and academic publications. We know we've heard about academic fracking, where journals have given away their authors' copyright to AI, big AI tech companies. We know that some of the models are trained on open source data sets like Wikipedia. We know there's a lot of social media and user-generated content. We know there's news, articles, and journalism. So this wide range of different materials. And this, of course, brings in all this tension that we kind of automatically feel around Creative Commons and these LLMs, and how we're going to try and figure this out, because clearly the legal frameworks are going to be moving much slower than the development in generative AI that's currently happening. So we can see here, there's things like, so Creative Commons licenses could be more compatible than traditional copyright, because by using them, you're saying that they can be shared and used. But then there are attribution challenges. So mostly when we're sharing through Creative Commons, we would really like to be attributed for our work as the minimum kind of recognition of what we've done. And so this becomes problematic and very difficult to trace and attribute CC licensing. And then there are other complications, like some CC licenses prohibit commercial use, which raises the question about the legality of using such content to train models that may be used in commercial applications. So this is a complicated area. It's not resolved yet. Creative Commons, no doubt, it's working very hard to try and think of ways where we can actually develop open models, open licenses to adapt to these additional challenges that have been brought on through generative AI. And this will be the cutting edge work that's happening at the moment. So I've outlined a number of concerns and challenges that we really need to be on top of and understand. Generative AI needs to be looked at with great caution. We need to understand it. We need to understand as much as we can about how it works, how it can work for our students, how we can use it, but we also need to understand all the ethical and bias concerns and take those as learnings so that we know how to use it in different contexts and we can guide our colleagues and our students. So what do we have now that can help us right now when we're thinking about open education and generative AI, and how these two could be looked at together towards the future? And this was a presentation done, as you see, September 2024, by Dr. David Wiley, who is very well known in the open education community, kind of a father figure in a way, right from the very beginning, began to do work in and defining open content from the early 2000s. And so when he did this presentation, there was quite a bit of excitement in the open education community to listen to what it is that he was saying. And what he was highlighting was this enormous potential of AI to create educational materials and open education materials. And he had this rather provocative title, Why Open Education Will Become Generative AI Education. And this is a nice presentation to go and listen to on YouTube if you're interested to hear his perspective. I would like to say become generative AI open education. I don't want to lose the open, but he makes very strong points about how we can use generative AI to create open education resources. And recently, to guide us, we have the Dubai Declaration on OER, which was developed, written, finalized in November 2024. In fact, it was the declaration itself was a huge collaborative effort, something like 6 regional consultations, 900 participants from around 90 countries who actually contributed into thinking about this relationship between open education and AI. And in November, there was the Third World Congress on OER, where this document was refined and clarified. And I would suggest that you all go and have a look. It's online and freely available, obviously. The title, Digital Public Goods, Open Solutions and AI for Inclusive Access to Knowledge. And it offers us 4 kind of key areas and a lot of hope around how much thought is currently going into thinking about how we can have responsible frameworks and open licenses, and how we can use that for generative AI to create open education materials. There are concerns around data privacy and how we can safeguard that. I talked about the stresses around attribution systems and attribution as being a basic principle of the Creative Commons and open community. How can we continue to think about attribution systems? And then the 4th point is around machine translation. And certainly we see that this is a very powerful place where translation is a wonderful solution for the future. I imagine a preferred future would be a place where we can have open education resources in every language. And AI will be certainly a way of overcoming language barriers in learning. So yes, it's a great document worth reading, and I'm imagining that we will be hearing more from the authors, collaborative authors of this document, and this can help guide us. So lots of work being done and more. I went to a very interesting, again, Apereo MicroCon discussion from Anne-Marie Scott. That was, I think, last week sometime, on an open source AI definition. And she introduced, it's also available on YouTube for you to watch. She introduced why this was so important. And that's what we need to grapple with right now, is being able to put an open stamp on AI. And that's why they have developed this open source definition. As she says, it's version 1.0 and will no doubt be adapted and changed as we go forward. But it's something for us to work to and have. And one of the points that she made was, in the past, we haven't been really good at defining open access, open education clearly, and we need to take care around that. And so they have developed this open source AI definition. And when I say they, it's this particular website that you can go to where they have the open source definition. So open source initiative, and worth going and exploring this resource and reading some more detail about the definition itself. Again, why is this so important? So protecting what we have and trying to open up what's happening with AI so that we can understand how it is programmed and used. Very importantly, combating open washing. So we know it's open AI, right? So exciting. Wow, it's open, but no, it's not open at all. It's the programming behind open AI is closed. It is not open source. So there is this open washing. It's like, oh, it's open, thinking open in terms of the principles that we hold dear. But in fact, that's not the case at all. So being very clear that OpenIA is not open and how we can define it. And hopefully by having these clear definitions and protections, we can inform the regulators like government. And these regulations are, as we saw in that one diagram, increasingly being developed in the global north, in Europe and the United States and elsewhere. Not to say it isn't happening in the global south, but happening more so in the global north. And so this is just kind of a little diagram of the open source definition and its different components. So 4 freedoms that are built in: use, study, modify, and share, basic open principles. It talks about the importance of open weights, and I'll talk about weights in the next slide in a little bit more detail, but open weights and parameters that needs to be made open. Open code, so the source code used to train the system should be made open. The code that created the data set must be made open. And the data, so the complete list of data used to train the system and the actual data set when allowed. So these are the fundamentals. This is the first version of an open AI definition. So when we talk about open weights, perhaps you all know about open weights. I didn't know about them until that presentation by David Wiley. But open weights are the numerical values that define a trained AI model's knowledge and capabilities. Okay, so the parameters that the model has learned during its training process. Okay, and if these are made transparent, then in the open source community or users or computer scientists, other open developers can have access to the inner workings of these AI models. So allowing them to analyze and improve all those sort of principles around open source. So open weights are something that are very important and should be encouraged from our side. Another possibility that I'm going to just throw out there before I go into a little case study that I wanted to share with you, potential for a new AI Commons. I've heard this idea sort of bantered around that, you know, there could be a place where we have material that we want to be open licensed and AI can be trained on that. So just a kind of way of promoting transparency and equitable access to knowledge, something maybe for the future. So in the last 5 minutes or so, I just want to share a case study from the University of Cape Town. Article published on it. It was published at the end or very beginning, at the end of 23, beginning of 2024. And we called it Learning Along the Way, a case study on a pedagogically innovative approach to engage medical students in the creation of open education resources using ChatGPT. So I just think it's a nice little example, something that you could perhaps be thinking about in your own teaching when you go back to your classrooms, about embracing what Gen AI can do and helping students with their literacy and helping with your own literacy and experimenting and seeing how these tools work in small and contained kind of ways. And this is an example of that. So what this is an example of as well, so it's kind of a combination of open education and the production of OER, students as partners, pedagogical approaches, which I won't go into detail here, but something that we're very interested in exploring further in creating open education materials. And you would have heard that I'm also involved on the editorial board of a journal around students as partners. And then AI-powered tools. So the nexus of open education, bringing students into authoring, and AI-powered tools. That is what this little case study is about. And the case study, as I said, medical students, was situated in orthopedics. And the lecturer has an open textbook in orthopedics. And that was kind of a first version of this book, and he wanted to create more chapters and continue the work on open education, so create a second open textbook. And particularly innovative and creative lecturer who we've supported quite a lot through our open textbook project. And we'd been working with him, but then hadn't been working with him for a few months. And we got an email from him right in the middle of kind of grappling with ChatGPT. This was all very new and exciting. And how are we going to make it work? And how can we think about it in open education? And he said, oh, he has this idea. He is going to use students to create open education chapters for his orthopedics textbooks using ChatGPT. And we thought, well, this is wonderful and innovative. Please, can we come and research this process? And that's what we did. So we got involved. The methodology was essentially to work closely with him, to be part of the different meetings that he had with his students, to interview him, and also to co-author this article with a student, so one of his students. So we really had a kind of collaborative approach to this. So this is what he said in the beginning, I'd like to use ChatGPT to create chapters. Students can review them and also add images as well. So he wanted local images. That was very important to illustrate the orthopedics. And he was really surprised. We were really surprised in the first few meetings how excellent the students' critical AI literacy was, how they were so concerned about checks and balances, about fact-checking, about thinking about the prompt, how AI was working, checking references. They came up with all of that without us, so him and his colleagues, actually telling them anything. So very impressed by the students' AI literacy. There were challenges, of course. So he felt that ChatGPT was a double-edged sword. So felt that it was quicker, certainly, to produce the chapters. So what the original orthopedics textbook chapters had taken months to produce, whereas this was obviously something that was very quick. And then the quality, but then he felt, although it was so quick to create and produce the chapters, the quality was not better. So he actually felt the quality would be better. So remember, these were early days. But that was his expectation, that he thought that they would actually be better. So interesting. And yes, he also was challenged by the idea of how to assess this particular what they called a short module or short study module, how to assess it, because this was a 6-week course the students did, and they needed to be assessed on this. And he was quite worried about how would he assess it. And the students were also worried about this. So what he did was he adjusted his rubric to make sure that the marks for the students came from their attention to process and the engagement with ChatGPT. So they had to keep all the prompts and conversation with ChatGPT and hand that in as part of the assignment. And the students who really engaged were more critical, were able to receive more actual marks for that engagement. So he worked a way around it. And in his words, he felt it was a game changer. So, and at the time, it was really exciting. And I think there are these opportunities to be able to create open education resources. And in this case, in collaboration with students, which is wonderful. And the students were really excited about the idea of not only the Chat GPT, but also the fact that they would be authors of those chapters and get credit for actually being part of this process. And so it has the potential to be a changer in the global south and facilitate better epistemic representation. And so all of these chapters that were created were also checked by experts. So it's not that this work was published without a layer of expertise, not only the lecturer, but also other experts. So the students felt, and they reflected in the paper, that they learned so much about open education, but about the actual subject of orthopedics that they didn't know before. This was the University of Cape Town's news article taking on this particular line that, you know, these medical students were empowered. And so just in conclusion, we can see that this relationship between open licenses and LMS is an issue that I've highlighted that needs to be updated and looked at. But it also underscores the importance of us having these kinds of conversations and working as a community, whether it's AI developers, legal experts, the open education community. We need to be working together to make sure that, you know, we have balanced solutions. What to do? Most important thing that I can recommend is critical AI digital literacy for yourselves and for your students. And that word critical is very important. Understand the ethics, the bias, understand as much as you can about how these tools work, and help your students to also understand that. And then follow key people. It's overwhelming how much information is out there, and it's not our core jobs at all. This is not my core job. It's part of my job. I can't keep up with all of this and all the other things I do. So it really helps to follow people like Leon Furs, Lance Eaton, Stefan Bouchard, and many others. But those three I particularly enjoy. Sign up for a course. So this is a plug for UCT. We have a Designing with AI course. But try and do a little course on AI. That's also going to help you to feel more confident about how you use these tools. And that's all from me. And I just thought this kind of idea of how do we uphold our sharing principles as something that I'd like you to be thinking about as you leave today. Thank you. That's all from me.
Well, thank you so much, Brenda. I think there was so much of, food for thought, I would say. Yes, and it opened up our minds to a different perspective, because most of the time we are talking about the tools, what they can do, the opportunities they give us, I mean, their capabilities and how to use. But today's webinar, we looked at the same thing, the generative AI, from a different angle. From the angle of open education. I think it was really, really good. Now we are at the Open University, and we are familiar with these concepts of Creative Commons licenses and open education, open licensing. So you raised some very critical questions about how, for example, how AI is widening the digital divide and the lack of openness in AI. And how, I mean, some very critical things, I mean, some things which we don't have answers yet. So anyway, I think it's an ongoing discussion about these things. So I think, as you very rightly suggest, our digital literacy is very important. The whole purpose of this, AI literacy, this series of webinars is also to, raise awareness of these different aspects. And yes, so let us answer some questions now. I think you got few questions in the chat box. So the first one from Sushumna from India. So shall I read it out? So she feels when we use LLMs to generate content, we may release with CC0 license, but prompt we used can be with any other CC license that we use. Please comment and suggest.
Okay, Phil, when we use LLMs to generate, we may release with CC. Yes, so CC0 is a public domain license because, and that's absolutely correct. So artificial intelligence is not a person and so cannot have copyright in the same way. So that's absolutely correct. I think the idea of Creative Commons licensing prompts is, in fact, it was one of the slides that I had that I took out because I thought had too many slides, is very important. And I think a great idea. The prompting, we know, was extremely the hot topic right in the beginning. Now we're finding it's easier because AI is just cleverer in terms of how it's putting things together. But the prompts are still very, very important, especially for our students. We know that if we don't prompt properly, we don't get the right content. And I think licensing them with the Creative Commons license is an excellent thing to do so that they are attributed to you, but also made openly available. I hope that answers that question.
Hopefully. Right, I think the question is now when we generate content using prompts and release it as CC0 with CC0, but the content would have been taken from other licenses maybe. I mean, you said we don't know from where the content is generated. That's the issue.
Yeah, so that's the look. It depends on what you're looking at, but mostly so different tools do different things. A lot of the LLMs don't reference properly. One of the fundamental principles that we could be following is always to ask whatever LLM we're using what the source is so that we can attribute.
Okay.
That becomes, the different models. Some models are trained on certain materials, like a chatbot or something like Notebook LM, where you can put your materials into that and the references will be correct. So you could put Creative Commons materials into that and come out with slides, course materials, whatever it is that are all Creative Commons licenses. Mm-hmm. So there are correct ways and principles that we can be using because we don't want to infringe anyone else's copyright.
Yeah, of course.
We want to be doing it in the right way.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion to ask for the source. Yeah. So the next question, there's another question about like how effectively can GenAI localize OER into indigenous or regional languages?
So at the moment, there is very exciting work happening in this area. I know of examples throughout Africa, obviously my context, of smaller startups and innovation happening where these language models are being trained, that are being developed and trained on smaller languages. So languages that don't have this corpus of information. It's a wonderful way to protect the languages, and it's being improved all the time. The number of languages that we can now translate into. So I think it's going to become more and more effective. I think in the beginning there was concern that it would be languages, French and English and Spanish and very well, Arabic, Chinese, languages that have the populations and have the data out there. But now we see increasingly that we can customize and make OER available in indigenous and regional languages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now, for example, our own language, I mean, in Sri Lanka, Sinhala is spoken only in Sri Lanka. So
Yes.
languages likewise.
Yes.
So, yeah. All right. Sometimes we don't get, I mean, we get most of the time, like now you mentioned it's like, I think you mentioned something about representation bias,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So there's another one on the case study. Great case study. Yes, I also thought that was a very interesting case study that you mentioned at the end, making students use AI and reflecting upon results by critiquing, because we have that as a major challenge because we can't stop them using now. I mean, everybody's using AI for their assignments, for their tasks. So any major challenges like copyright infringement they came across? How did they check for plagiarism? I
So
suppose with
making
AI
students use, I'm
generated
just looking
content.
at reflecting. How did the lecturer check for plagiarism? I'm just trying to understand the question.
I
So
believe, okay, shall I open up? I
it's
mean,
okay.
they can ask by themselves.
Let me talk through it.
Yeah.
So what the students uh, had had different approaches. So some of them, there was a small group, I think it was six of them, either went straight to ChatGPT and said, write about, the medial ligament or something in the knee. And gave a proper prompt. So there was a prompt that the lecturer gave to all the students that they could use, and then they could move further down. But there was a prompt initially, and then they would check and ask for references. So they would get a set of references from ChatGPT, and then they went and checked those references. So there was a real checking process. Another student put the readings into ChatGPT. So she worked the other way around. So she could be guaranteed that there wasn't kind of hallucination or ChatGPT making up something.
Mhm.
So there were different ways of kind of controlling that. And those were all referenced at the end of the chapter. So there wasn't any kind of worry about copyright infringement that came across, and the images that they took had ethics approval and were taken of patients, but kind of the patient's knee, or it wasn't, no one was recognized and so on, but they were local images that they could take.
Mhm.
How did they check for plagiarism?
Mm.
So we know right at this very moment, unless somebody has some news for me in the room, we cannot detect reliably. We cannot detect AI reliably. As far as I know, there is no tool that can do this. And so we must be very careful about, and that's why there's such a big conversation around assessment, right? Because we're so concerned that students might be using too much AI, and we don't always know how to check it. We can have conversations and so on, but it's a very difficult area at the moment because we can't reliably detect, and we certainly cannot punish them for anything. We should not be saying, oh, Turnitin said there was this much there. You failed your assignment, because it could be Grammarly,
Yeah.
or it could be a student who needs to translate, which
Mhm.
is an AI. So you need to be, it's a very, very tricky area, thinking about assessment and plagiarism, and how to go about checking it.
Mm. I think it's a whole different topic on assessment and Gen AI.
Yes,
I believe
yes.
that's a totally, I mean, very broad topic. I think a lot of discussions are going on, a lot of research going on, and papers being published. I think we have to keep on updating. As you mentioned, it's overwhelming. I mean, day to day, what's happening, the pace it's happening, it's very fast. Right. So I think we don't have any other questions other than, comments about the webinar. Okay,
We'll
so
share the slides with you. I'll
yeah,
share the slides with you, Sharonika, and you can circulate them to the list.
yes. And we actually record this webinar and we upload it in our Open Education website, YouTube channel. At the OUSL, we have launched this new YouTube channel on Open Education, so it will be shared among all, I mean, globally, because some registered might not be able to join with us today. And we can, I mean, are there any other quick questions or any comments? I have now, you can unmute yourselves if you like, or switch on your video if you like. Anyone? If you would like to ask anything by yourself, please go ahead. Yes. Yes, Sushumna, would you like to ask anything?
Not really. Actually, thank you so much. Such a wonderful talk this is, and very much I'm also into these kind of things. And I just want to thank Glenda and also your university for this wonderful talk. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for
Thank you
joining.
very much.
Right. The slides I will be sharing with all the participants. The YouTube video will be uploaded in another week or so on the Open YouTube channel. Right. Okay. So if we don't have any other questions, I think we can wind up the session now. And once again, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the participants for joining us, and especially Glenda, Associate Professor Glenda Cox from the University of Cape Town, for very kindly accepting our invitation from the Open Institute of Sri Lanka and sharing his very valuable and very interesting thoughts with us on open education, OER, OEP, and generative AI. So thank you very much, everybody. So we'll end the session now and have a nice rest of the day. We'll meet again next month with another webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.